Hi guys, Hira here, and I'm here to help you be the author you were meant to be. And for that, you need to know about brainstorming, and that's literally what it sounds like, electrocuting your brain for ideas, plots, stories, characters, whatever it is you want to put in that story. Now, the coming up with ideas part you can get through by just thinking hard or not thinking at all, or story prompts, or whatever it is you want to do. After that, though, you need to organize those ideas into a book, a story, an actual story. You can't just have ideas cluttered around in binded paper. So, I'm gonna help you with that. But first off, if you really think that this whole breaking your story down into sections, organizing it all through, sticking to your first ideas is not for you, that's totally normal. That's how I did it. But if you want to break your story down, if you want to go step by step, which is totally fine too, you can use a story structure. And I'm going to help you with that. You can either do a 3-act story structure or a 7-act story structure, or I guess you can just plot it down without a structure. I'm going to talk to you about the 7-act story structure, though it's totally fine to just write a full story without any structure at all. So, the first part of the 7-act story structure is the backstory, and this is the part of the story that sets up the events of your plot. Probably when your story starts, your character is not going to be an infant. There is probably going to be some life before that. And this life is what makes your protagonist. And so you're either going to want to mention that in your prologue, or you can totally mention it during your story, during the events of your story, and it would totally work out. After that is the catalyst. This is the part where your protagonist starts moving, where your protagonist is faced with an obstacle. There's a pending decision to be made. They just discover something which brings your story into effect. For example, in Percy Jackson, this will be the point where Percy finds out that he's a demigod. Or in Harry Potter, this will be Hagrid telling Harry that he's a wizard. After that comes the big event, and this is where the situation starts to become a bit trickier. The protagonist has to decide whether or not to trust this person, whether or not they can continue with the story, whether or not they should really step out of their comfort zone. And at this point, you want to ask yourself what your protagonist's comfort zone is and why they want to stay there. And you're going to force your protagonist out of this comfort zone into the midpoint. And this is a point of no return where your protagonist makes the decision and starts the story. And I know it's the midpoint, but this is probably where your story really starts to roll. And around this part, you might want to introduce the opposition. This is the person or thing your protagonist has to face, has to defeat to reach their desire, their goal. And while they're trying to reach the goal, they end up at the crisis. This is the low point where your protagonist is forced to make a decision that leads them to the climax. And your villain could have done something terrible, you could have done something terrible to them, or the protagonist must have just destroyed themselves. And before the crisis, I like to add a moment of hope where the protagonist thinks that they have reached their goal when they are pulled to the depths of despair, also known as the crisis. And once they get to the crisis, they struggle through it and they reach the climax. This is the final showdown between your protagonist and the opposition. This is where worlds collide and they finally face each other. And during this climax, you can end the book in two ways. You can end it in a cliffhanger, and I recommend cliffhangers if you're writing a story. You don't want to just finish the story off and leave your reader thinking that's the end of your series. If you're writing a standalone, I wouldn't recommend a cliffhanger. Readers like to achieve a moment of truth where they understand what the point of this entire story was. And that is a realization where your protagonist realizes the theme of the story and your reader realizes so with the protagonist. And your theme is basically the message you're trying to scream from the rooftops to your readers. And obviously, you don't need to write your theme out in bold letters at the bottom of the story, like, be happy, be kind. It's a message your protagonist learns throughout the events of the story. So, what does all this have to do with brainstorming? You're going to want to come up with these plot points for your story along with the character. Now, the most important part of brainstorming is the character. You want to know who your story is about, not what the story is about. In real life, we don't really care about the situation, we care about the people who the situation affects. If there's a hurricane, okay, let there be a hurricane. If there's a hurricane in the middle of a village with people who will die, oh no, we gotta fix that. So, your main character, your protagonist, is the hero of the story, the person or thing the plot revolves around. In other words, for once, the world revolves around someone. And don't feel scared to make everything revolve around the person. The book is about this person because things are happening to them. Don't force the happenstances, it just happens. Now, your protagonist, you should design them in a way that they are not Superman without a kryptonite. They will have a kryptonite. And along with that kryptonite, they should also have a goal, a desire that they want to reach. And along with that desire comes with a lie, a conflict, something that's stopping them from reaching that goal. And your main character, your protagonist, should try to reach that goal in despite of this conflict. And you should make the character strong enough and weak enough in a way that the reader will root for them and relate to them until the end of your story. And I want you to know that your protagonist does not need to be perfect, but they should not be the anti-hero, which is the person in the story who isn't the villain, but they don't really learn anything. There's nothing special about them. They have to realize, but they should also not realize immediately. They shouldn't be the prophet that understands everything. And along with your protagonist is its mirror, which is the antagonist. And this is the person in the story who we all love to hate. And just like the protagonist, they should also have something they really, really want. And that desire clashes with the desire of your protagonist. This desire does not and should probably not be a desire for the sake of being a desire. And it should not be something that's obviously bad. Your villain shouldn't want to destroy the world. Your villain should be thinking that they're saving the world while they're destroying it. In other words, your villain is the hero of their own story. You have to give them enough power to achieve that until they're stopped. If you were writing your book from the point of view of your antagonist, there should not be a happy ending unless you don't want to give your protagonist a happy ending. But it should be the same steps. There should be a desire, there should be a conflict, there should be strengths and weaknesses. And they have to be the hero of their own story. And for example, a great example of a villain is Scar. Scar doesn't want to kill Simba and Mufasa for the sake of killing Simba and Mufasa. Scar wants to sit on the throne. He believes that he should be the one sitting on the throne. And to sit on the throne and to help the jackals, I guess, he does everything he can to make sure he sits on the throne. And in that case, it involves killing Simba and Mufasa. making him the villain, but the hero of his own story until he dies. Now, the number one thing about brainstorming is to write everything down. Whatever you thought about during this video, write it down. You will not remember it. You will just keep getting more ideas, and the only way to keep them all in track is to write them down. Work on your characters, work on your story, and I'll see you next time with a planned out story so we can get into writing. Thank you guys, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or mail me. Bye!